Hello, everyone. We are live on the Spunky Spectrum Sports YouTube page talking UFC 294. Before I bring in today's guest, please subscribe, like, and share the Spunky Spectrum Sports YouTube page. It could be MMA, it could be baseball, football, golf, all kinds of sports. Also, check out the Big D podcast for all the audio listeners, Spotify, and Apple. So, joining me today, the only guy who can talk Makhachev, Volkanovski, and Amon-Ra St. Brown scoring another touchdown. Action Network, Fantasy Labs, Billy Ward. So Billy, UFC 294 in Abu Dhabi, same place that it was this time last year, and I think we've got one different call that I thought we were going to be talking about a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, 3 of the 5 on the main card, including the main co-main, all got reshuffled. But I'm not going to lie, I think I'm kind of more excited about it now than I was with the original bookings. Volkanovski gave Islam Makhachev a much tougher fight than Charles Oliveira did when those two met. It's a rematch for both of them. I'm not super high on Usman's chances against Hamzat here, coming up a weight class on short notice. But this is a more impactful fight, I think, to the division and the rankings than Hamzat versus Paulo Costa was. That would have been fun too, entertaining in a different way. Rumor has it to get Usman to take this fight, they said whoever wins it gets the next shot at the middleweight title. That makes things interesting. Usman holds a win over Strickland already. Hamzat would probably absolutely murder Sean Strickland. So in a weird way, they actually made the card a little bit more fun, even though it wasn't what we had originally planned.
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, it looked like we were going to get a rematch between Makhachev and Charles Oliveira. I mean, be honest, we saw that fight here last year. Oliveira looked way outclassed in that fight, and be honest with you, I don't think this fight would have gone well for him either.
Yeah, obviously he's older, he's taken more damage. Stylistically, it's really hard to see what he brings to, or what he would have brought, I guess, using past tense since it's off, to Makhachev, just because Oliveira probably isn't going to tap him on the ground, and Makhachev can take him down whenever he wants. So it's a tough fight. The striking would have been interesting if he can keep it on the feet. I just didn't see him doing that. Volkanovski has shown us that he can keep it on the feet, and he can even win some grappling exchanges. Totally different body type than Charles Oliveira, which makes things interesting. And, striking advantage. The one issue I have with this, I would have loved to see this fight with a full training camp for Volkanovski, is I think Volkanovski's best path to victory is just with his way better cardio than Islam. Does he have that cardio taking the fight on 11 days' notice? We'll see. I'm guessing he was in reasonably good shape or he wouldn't have agreed to it. But there's reasonably good, I've been training and getting ready for a 5-round fight shape. Those are not exactly the same things, as any fighter will tell you. So that'll be the key factor here. I think he needs it to be a long fight. He needs it to be a grind and win that way.
Yeah, so main event. We saw it in Australia in February, and I think this is going to be a great fight. Probably, Volkanovski, probably a better. I don't know if I call him power puncher, but definitely stylistically better puncher. Makhachev's probably a better boxer than Khabib, but I expect what Makhachev's going to try and do is take this fight to the ground and maybe hope that Volkanovski's lack of a camp and lack of being on the mat hurts him, because I think Volkanovski showed in his last fight. Now, true, Volkanovski's not going to be the who's the big guy from, not going to be a Derek Lewis knockout artist, but Volkanovski showed he could win and knock out somebody, because that's always been Volkanovski's problem.
Yeah, he has solid power. He might be, and people don't talk about him this way, but he might be the best overall athlete in the UFC, just in terms of speed,
Well,
explosiveness.
yeah, he's a darn rugby player.
Yeah, and big. He played rugby at well over 200 pounds. Just in terms of the whole package athletically, he very well might be the best there is in the UFC. So that's an interesting angle. I think he's the better all-around striker. I'd say Islam is a better striker than Khabib was, but I don't think either of those guys are at the level of Volkanovski, just with his speed and head movement and all those other things he brings. But yeah, he's got a shot at, if he can keep it standing, landing some strikes. I do think the biggest thing is Volkanovski just needs to wear him down, right? Body shots, leg kicks, shove him against the fence, be that short little fire plug that he is. And it's interesting, I think the other fight being in Australia, had that been in the US with US commissions, I could see a case that Volkanovski won because Makhachev had a ton of ground control that he didn't really do anything with. And we've swung that pendulum so far where it's almost like fighters get penalized for getting a takedown and then not hurting the guy once they get there, compared to where it used to be just if you got on top, you won automatically. Unfortunately, this is also not in the US, also not a place with like a real athletic commission. So who knows what kind of judging and what kind of criteria there'll be. You'd have to assume it's a little bit biased towards Islam being in Dubai. We don't know that for sure, but that doesn't help the cause here for Volkanovski. So he probably needs to win more clearly and not spend too much of the time on his back.
Yeah, we don't need to talk about some of the UFC judging, but that's a story for another day. Do you worry about Volkanovski, A, lack of training camp, B, just had a kid, and C, he's coming off hand surgery. So will Volkanovski be himself going into this fight?
Yeah, I think so. And I'm going to get a little personal anecdote here, but I think Islam is kind of like the boogeyman that Volkanovski's been chasing for a little bit. Like he really wants this fight. And I had a fighter like that. He was like the top welterweight here in Michigan. He ended up going to the UFC, Daquan Townsend. And I was supposed to fight him 2 or 3 times, really wanted that fight. Stuff kept happening. But like, even when I was training for other fights, I was really training for that fight. And I have a feeling that that's what Volkanovski's doing. Like everything he's done since, the first fight was announced, he's got Makhachev in the back of his mind, even if he's fighting Yair Rodriguez or Ilya Topuria or any of those other guys. So I'm not too worried about that. I think he's been preparing for Makhachev at all times. Yeah, some of those other things aren't great, but it's Volkanovski. He powers through all that stuff. It's his 3rd kid. It's probably his 10th surgery. Like, whatever. We're not going to worry too much about that. So yeah, I hear you. I think he's a good bet at his odds. More than plus 200. He didn't look like a plus 200 underdog in the first fight. It looked like a coin flip. And then for DFS, it's interesting because there's so many heavy favorites here that guys like Makhachev, who would normally be 9,500, are 8,700. And Volkanovski, even in a loss, can put up a big score. He got to 68 in this first fight. So this is one that obviously in cash games you play both of them. I wouldn't be shocked if they both end up in the winning GPP lineup if a lot of the other heavy favorites handle their business, because you're going to need a cheap guy to put up a decent score, and it might just be Volkanovski even in a loss.
Do you how would Makhachev's game plan differ from the first fight compared to this one?
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. He's not a guy who I think really needs custom game plans. He's kind of just going to do his thing no matter who he's fighting. There's fighters like George St. Pierre is the best example. He fights a wrestler. He looks like, the crispest jabber in the world and just lives behind his jab and his leg kick. And he fought these dangerous strikers. He's like, cool, I'll wrestle you and take you down. That's not Makhachev. Makhachev is going to do Islam Makhachev stuff, just like Khabib. They're going to do their thing kind of no matter who they're fighting. So I don't think Makhachev changes too much here. If I'm in his camp and I'm in his ear, I'm saying we need to hurt the guy when he's on the ground. We can't just take him down and stay on his back. We're probably not going to submit him. It looks like Volkanovski's submission defense is just too good. So let's toss out the attempts at rear naked chokes and hand fighting for 4 minutes on his back and just beat him up when you can. That's the one thing I think I would change if I was, working with Makhachev or if I was Makhachev. Outside of that, though, I mean, he's going to wrestle. He's going to work for takedowns. That's just what he does. So I don't think that's a huge factor. How he wrestles and the kind of takedowns he gets are going to be a big difference than when he was fighting Charles Oliveira. But in terms of what he's going to do to Volkanovski versus the first time, I don't know. What would you really change,
I mean, if it's not broke, don't fix it, right? I mean, maybe just make Volkanovski pay, especially coming in on short notice.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's the one thing. And just, again, with the way judging is, you got to prioritize a little bit more damage and striking on the ground. And Makhachev was that whole fight. He wrote out basically a whole round on Volkanovski's back. Didn't really hit him at all, but he was hand fighting, looking for chokes, and they kind of weren't there. Volkanovski, brought in Craig Jones, who's a super high level BJJ guy, great grappling in his camp. I don't think he's going to tap him. I don't know if it's possible to tap Alexander Volkanovski. Like, he's got no neck, short little arms. He's super muscular. What do you tap him with? Obviously, it's possible, but you know what I'm saying. So, like, yeah, that'd be the one change is I'm like, just beat him up. Don't even worry about chokes. Don't worry about submissions. If he finally gets so hurt that he's sticking his neck up, great. But we're just going to try to TKO him or, cut him to death on the ground.
How do you think this second, if you in Alexander Volkanovski's camp, how do you think this, what would your strategy be?
Yeah, and if I'm on the other side of it, it's we need to reverse these positions or get back to the feet. You did a great. That's what I'm telling him. You did a great job not getting tapped. You did a great job defending submissions. Tremendous, but you're still probably losing the round when he's in that better spot. We got to take a little bit more risks. Maybe we do expose something and bait a submission to get our way out of there, which is scary, and you might get caught. But we trust our submission defense. We can't spend that whole round with him on our back, even if we're doing better than he is in terms of strikes. The judges aren't going to reward that, probably, almost certainly not in Dubai when they didn't in Australia. So yeah, he's on your back. You did a great job surviving, but we can't just survive for a whole round. We got to take it to him.
I also think mix in some leg kicks, because if you mix in the leg kicks, then maybe Makhachev's not as aggressive taking you to the mat.
That's tricky though, because he's shorter with a shorter reach, so that makes it a little bit harder. But also, anytime you're picking your foot up off the ground, you open yourself up to being taken down a little bit more. So I like that. If anything, I would think, can you shove Makhachev up against the fence, use your lower center of gravity, hold him there, beat up the legs and body with knees? That might be my preferred way of going about that, rather than from range, where as soon as I see his hips twitch, if I'm Makhachev, that's when I shoot. I'm waiting for that rear hip to come forward on any kind of kick. I don't care if it's leg, body, or head. And that's when I'm blasting to the other one, just because it makes it so much easier.
Do you think the short notice fight helps or hurts either fighter more?
I mean, no. I know you were asking me for which fighter, but I'm going to say no. Like, both guys have, for Volkanovski, obviously he wasn't preparing for a fight, so that's a big shift. I think it's enough of a shift in who he's fighting that the same can be said for Makhachev. And if it weren't Alexander Volkanovski with his legendary cardio and his legendary preparedness, the obvious answer would be the fighter taking it on short notice. It's Volkanovski, man. Volkamania is running wild in Dubai. So for him, I'm going to say probably net neutral.
I see you not picking any sides, thinking maybe Makhachev's thinking I'm going to spend the whole fight on the ground. Now I'm thinking, oh wait, this guy can beat the living you know what out of me.
Yeah, I mean, it's just he's got to deal with so much more counter wrestling. Volkanovski might actually even take him down here and there, not stuff Oliveira was going to do. With Oliveira, you're worried about defending submissions from your back, not holding him there because he's so squirmy. And with Oliveira on the feet, you're worried about head kicks, knees, elbows, tall, long guy coming from weird angles. Volkanovski, he's right in your face, hands in your face all night. Very different to prepare for, very different defensively. Obviously, on the Volkanovski side, it's how good a shape are you in? Were we really ready? Is the elbow good? Is your wife going to let you sneak out of the house for 2 weeks, having just had a third kid? Those are the factors on his side. So it's interesting, but I think on balance, it's really hard to say that it helps one fighter more than the other.
I mean, if Volkanovski's in his A shape, remember Makhachev has only been 25 minutes once, and Volkanovski goes 25 minutes every other Tuesday.
Right. Yeah, that's what I meant about like just the historical nature of the cardio. And I think it's a pretty significant weight cut for Makhachev to 155. Like, I think
he's a big guy. He's a big guy.
It's tough for him to get down there. And Volkanovski gets the added benefit of not really having to cut as much to 150. Believe me, he's still cutting to 155. He's not walking around at 158. But like, it's not a brutal cut for him. It shouldn't be too hard, especially with just having a fight at 45. So that's one factor that I think helps the cardio a little bit for Volkanovski if it goes late.
Might help him be more aggressive, though.
Yeah, or just, able to keep that pace up for 25 minutes like he always does. I mean, he does that at 145 too, even when he does have a bad weight cut. So,
well, as we mentioned, the main event wasn't the only fight with a last minute. Well, I don't know if you call it last minute, or maybe in this case a late replacement, where we've got this intriguing middleweight bout between Kazmat, what's his last, Chermev?
Hamzat Chimaev.
Hamza Chimaev and former UFC welterweight champ Kamil Usman.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, we've seen Usman fight Leon Edwards twice. First one knocked down in the last round. Second fight, not so hot.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think from the Usman standpoint, this is a great career move. He wasn't getting a shot at welterweight championship until it wasn't Leon Edwards anymore. And who knows how long that'll be. Like, Leon probably takes care of Colby easily. That's a different story. So if you're Usman and you really want to be fighting for titles and stuff like that, yeah, why not try it at middleweight? The middleweight champ is a guy you beat in the past and a guy you probably would be a pretty big favorite over right now. Obviously, getting in there with Hamzat Chimaev to earn your way to that title shot is the harder part. But, like, it's not like he's fighting some giant middleweight either. Hamzat was fighting welterweight fairly recently. I don't think it'll be a huge size discrepancy. These are both guys who primarily fought welterweight. Yeah, Hamzat missed weight pretty bad, but it's not like he's, a Dricus Duplessis or one of these giant middleweights who barely makes middleweight. So it might be the fight for Usman, and if Usman's got the wrestling to make this tough on Hamzat to take him down, which he certainly should given his pedigree, it could be a really interesting fight. This one, I think, from a betting standpoint, Hamzat, I think, needs to get this one done early. I'm probably betting on him to win in round one or same game parlay with him win in under 1.5 rounds. Where the longer this one goes, the more I favor Usman. Like, I don't have a lot of faith in Hamzat's cardio because he's a guy who just starched everybody other than Gilbert Burns in all of his fights. Like, he just mauled everyone he fought. You don't really have a need for cardio. What happens when you get out of the first round? He couldn't tell you. Usman, obviously very good cardio historically. Cardio looked fine against Edwards in that first fight. He looks the fresher fighter, but, Edwards threw the Hail Mary head kick. And cardio wasn't an issue in the second fight. He got outclassed. He was out, skilled. So I have no reason to doubt Usman's cardio. Probably in really good shape. He trains in Denver all the time. And like we said with Volkanovski, not as much of a weight cut as he normally has. That probably helps. So I think this is a more interesting fight than the odds are suggesting. If I'm betting Usman, FanDuel has an option win in round 3 or by decision, or DraftKings the parlays with over 1.5, or just wait and take it live. I really like all those options. And another fight where Usman, I think, is probably going to be underrated from a DFS standpoint. Super cheap, but high work rate. He's, in terms of like points per minute from DFS options, Usman might be like one of the best fighters ever. Like, he's doing a ton of takedowns. He's doing a ton of strikes, getting finishes when they're there, racking up control time. Like, his output or his work rate is just so high. It's kind of like targeting an NFL team with a fast pace of play. We just know what we're getting out of that. I will say, make this one 5 rounds. Who says no? Like, why can't we? I know it's not a title. I know it's not a main event. Call it the, BMF belt or some other random belt. Just throw it up there. This would be so much more fun if we got 25 minutes of this one. And
agree. Almost like the trying to think
there's a random Nate Diaz fight they did that with one time. Whereas, like, it wasn't for a belt, it wasn't a main event, but they're like, everyone wants 25 minutes. Let's do it. And I think we should do the same thing here because it sounds like the rumor has it that they promised Usman, or they promised the winner of this a middleweight title fight, like to get him to take it. And I don't really want to see Hamzat in a title fight before he goes 5 rounds ever. Like, I want to see what happens. Or at least before he's booked for 5 rounds. Who knows if it makes it that far. I thought the Gilbert Burns fight should have been 5 rounds. Again, there was no real reason to, other than how cool would that be. But, like, let's have some fun here, guys. We're throwing the card into shambles. Why not make it more interesting? Obviously, Dana White didn't call me. Neither did the matchmaking department there. Neither did, whoever's sanctioning this fight in Dubai. That's the one thing that I wish would have happened here. But I'm very excited for this fight. I think it's going to be closer than the odds suggest. Hamzat needs to really get a takedown right away and do Hamzat stuff because it could get ugly late for him.
I mean, we know what Usman can do. He's going to try and finish this early. I think only one of his fights has gone even 15 minutes, right?
Yeah, that was the Gilbert Burns fight. I think that might have even been his only fight, like, in his career, not just counting UFC, that made it out of the first round. I'm going to check real quick just to verify that. He might have had like one that went to the second, but First round. When he fought John Phillips, his UFC debut, second round submission. 1 minute 15 for another submission before the UFC. So he's had a couple that went early in the second round. But outside of that, Burns was the only one to make it all 15. Burns was the only one to even see the start of the third round or the second half of the second round. So we don't really know what's going to happen if this goes 8 minutes or longer. He didn't look great down the stretch against Burns.
And Usman is not a good wrestler. He is a phenomenal wrestler. And guess what happens if you're on your back? You're not winning rounds.
Well, and we don't know what Khamzat's like off his back because no one's ever put him there. So, like, does he have any get-ups? Does he have a submission threat? Does he have a way to work his way back to his feet? I would suspect he does. Like he's a world-class grappler all around. So it's hard to say that he's got nothing off his back. But we don't know. Like, there's guys I train with at the gym. There's a guy who used to be a D1 wrestler, comes and does jiu-jitsu. And he's awesome when he's on top. He's going to kill you. But you put him on his back and it gets a little ugly just because he doesn't have to practice that ever. And Khamzat might be the same way. Not that I'm comparing, a random purple belt at my local suburban jiu-jitsu gym to Khamzat Chimaev, but maybe I did a little bit.
Do you think being a middleweight will help or hurt Usman? Because, at 170, he could weight cut easily. Do you think the added 15 pounds will help him here? Because I think he'll be a little bit of a small middleweight, right?
Not horribly small. Like, he's got a huge reach, really big guy. I don't worry too much about it. I think in the net, it's probably good for him just because middleweight is a little bit softer of a division. We've seen what happened to the middleweight title. Like, Sean Strickland wasn't winning a welterweight gold. He got out of welterweight. It's just a lot tougher and a lot more crowded at welterweight. I think the skill level at middleweight, broad strokes, is a little bit lower, especially with Adesanya taking some time off, Bahia going up to 205. Like, there's not really that guy or that series of guys at middleweight that you're that worried about. So I think you can afford to give up a little bit of size and strength when you're fighting less skilled fighters. I think he's just as big as Sean Strickland. Like, he's not going to – if you put Usman in there with Sean Strickland, you wouldn't go, oh, Kamaru, he's way bigger than you. And that's the current champ. So, yeah, what
Strickland 6 years ago.
Right. And, there's some guys in there. DDP stands out, Costa, even Robert Whittaker to an extent where you're like, kind of a big boy, might be tough. But Usman's so much faster than those guys, so much more skilled than those guys. And Whittaker was a former welterweight too, so I shouldn't even include him. I don't think it's a bad thing. That's kind of always the trade-off in MMA is the heavier weight classes, the skill level's a little bit lower. So, yeah, you might be giving up a little bit of strength, but if you've got an advantage somewhere else. Of course, the one caveat is the guy he's fighting now, Khamzat Chimaev, or other one we haven't talked about, Bo Nickel, who's both massive and the best wrestler to ever wrestle, pretty much. No, not really, but darn close. That would be a tough fight. I wish they would have called Bo Nickel for this one. I would have been losing my mind for it. We'll talk about that when we get Bo Nickel booked for a fight like this.
You think Bo Nickel would actually be a harder matchup here than Usman? Because Bo Nickel, short notice, Bo Nickel takes you down and then he knocks you out.
Yeah, I think whatever happened here, well, what would happen there is if Bo Nickel couldn't get a takedown fast, he'd probably just get starched on the feet. Like, even that knockout he picked up on the feet in the last one, like, it was real sloppy. That shouldn't have worked. Obviously, he's got power, but his technique in terms of striking is like, high-level amateur MMA fighter at this point in his career. He doesn't need it. I'm not questioning that. He's got the speed, power, and most importantly, wrestling ability. But Khamzat's not an easy guy to take down. So if I'm Khamzat in that fight, I go, cool, we're having a striking match. I'll keep this on the feet and probably win that. So, yeah, I think at this point in their career would have been an easier fight for Khamzat because it's so one-dimensional what you need to do. With Usman, Khamzat's going to have a hard time if it's striking, and Kamaru might screw around and shoot a takedown of his own just to keep Khamzat off balance. So that'll be, I think, the challenge here is what kind of fight we're going to have, who initiates that first. Is Khamzat just going to get suckered into a brawl like he did with Gilbert Burns? Those are all questions that I don't think we'd have if he was fighting Bo Nickel. Would go, oh, yeah, he's just going to keep Bo Nickel on the feet and kick his head off.
Plus, we don't know about Bo Nickel's condition. We know Usman can go 25 minutes with the best of them.
True. I don't worry about that. These wrestlers, man, are the most conditioned athlete you'll ever meet in any sport. Like I don't doubt that for a second. We haven't seen it. He hasn't needed more than a minute in any of his fights, including Contender Series. So I get why you would ask that, not knowing as many wrestlers as I might, or not having the pleasure of getting ground to death over 25 minutes by wrestlers like I have in my life. I don't worry about that. He'll be fine, cardio wise.
Why is wrestling so much harder on the lung capacity than just boxing for 25 minutes?
Because in boxing, one, you're not using as much of your body. It's not as much anaerobic, like I'm really squeezing or grabbing. But the biggest thing in boxing, we exchange and then we kind of back out, catch our breath. In wrestling, there's literally no rest position. There's no stop position. So for the whole length of the round, be that minute and a half to 3 minutes, depending on what level you're wrestling at, you are straining for 180 seconds straight. There's no spot. Jiu-jitsu is very calm. You get in my guard. I can settle. I can work for this. I'm setting this up. I'm setting traps. We're chill. Wrestling, if I'm on my back, I've already lost. So the minute there's a takedown, I'm exploding to my stomach trying to get up. I'm bringing my legs in. I'm driving the whole time. And you on top are doing the same thing, trying to flip me over, trying to not let me up. Like there's a reason wrestling matches, even in the Olympics, go no more than like 8 minutes, where championship boxing matches are 36. It's that much harder on a per minute basis to do that.
And whether you're fighting 8 minutes wrestling and 36 minutes in the 25 minutes in the octagon, 36 minutes in the ring, you're all exhausted.
Yeah, but so the thing we're seeing in MMA is a lot of the grappling looks more like a wrestling match where guys aren't playing guard the way they used to. Like Charles Oliveira being a notable exception. But most people aren't getting guard and going, okay, I can stay here for a couple minutes. I can work stuff. And then guys are hitting the back and they're popping right back up. So that's the interesting thing where it is looking more like a wrestling match than a jiu-jitsu match in a lot of cases, but not all.
Okay, we've talked title fight, co-main event. Before any other fights are canceled, any other fights canceled, rearranged, postponed, declared no contest. What are your other fights you're looking on this card for?
Yeah, one of the fights on the main card that didn't get rearranged, Magomed Ankalaev versus Johnny Walker. We've already booked the next 205-pound title fight between Yuri P and Pereira, which will be an amazing fight. So excited for that. These guys could probably have a case for being next in line for the 205 title, assuming Jamal Hill isn't ready to come back for one or two more, which I think is a safe assumption. It'll be an interesting fight. Ankalaev didn't look great in his last match against Jan Blachowicz. Probably still should have got the decision, but didn't really look great. I've been impressed by Johnny Walker his last few fights. So that'll be an interesting fight. It's a tough card overall. There's a lot of, if you look at the betting lines, a lot of mismatches. Not, too many tight lines. A guy like said Nurmagomedov, minus 205, should probably be a heavier favorite. Muhammad Makhachev is the most expensive fighter for DFS. No idea why he's fighting Tim Elliott. Like, this is stupid. Tim Elliott's fine, but, he's going to smash him, but whether you get up to him for a DFS standpoint at 9,600 is a big question, especially when there's guys at 9K that are, or, Hamzat's 89, Sed's 88, Makhachev's 87. It's hard to justify paying 9,600 for Mokaev in that one, but he could get a million takedowns if Tim Elliott pops up. So an interesting one just from like a strategy standpoint for DFS, not a super interesting one from a fan standpoint. What else do we got? We got Trevor Peek fighting on this one. We didn't even talk about that. I don't know if anyone remembers Trevor Peek, but he's the, standing hammer fist, kind of crazy guy, brawler, fighting a, UFC debutant who's very hot prospect, fought in Brave in the Middle East. That'll be a fun one. Can Trevor Peek make this a crazy Trevor Peek fight, or is this going to be a more technical striking match? I think that's the 8,000, 8,200 fight for DraftKings. So getting that one right is going to be crucial because there's so many mismatches on the card.
Yeah, and I feel like every time the UFC goes to Dubai, I'm not saying the atmosphere is bad, but when the UFC went to Australia, the UFC goes to Brazil, or when GSP fought in Canada, or you have one of these guys fight, one of these big names fight, the atmosphere is always there. I don't know if the atmosphere is there in Dubai for these fights.
I don't know. I think they're fun, but it's clear what they're doing with the matchmaking. Anytime they go to places that they're not frequently at, they're trying to send the hometown crowd happy. Like, obviously, a lot of these fighters are Russian, which isn't in Dubai, but the Russians like to vacation there. They have a relationship there. Some of them train there from time to time. So, like, all these, Western Russian or Southern Russian, Dagestani grapplers and such, those are going to be the hometown favorites here in Dubai. So they're trying to give them matches that they think they're going to win. I mean, you look up and down the card, we've got an 11-0 guy I've never heard of fighting Bruno Silva, what looks like a mismatch for him. Victoria Dudakova, 7-0 Russian, fighting a lower level UFC opponent in Jinyu Fry. That might be the salary saver fight just because, female fight might go to a decision. But it's really tough to see Jinyu Fry doing anything there. Muhammad Naimov versus Nathaniel Wood. Wood actually a favorite here, so that's interesting. We got the British fighter favored. That's going to be another important fight to get right. But, from DFS standpoint, one or two of these underdogs are going to pull off an upset. If you can figure out who those are, it's a really easy week. You're going to make a ton of money. If you can't, it's going to be a long one because you can't pay for all the $9,000 fighters in the same lineup. You can maybe cram 3 in.
How do you think this week will be for cash? Because obviously we're going to have both main event fighters because Makhachev scores 1,000,000 points, and even when Volkanovski lost in February, he put up 60 some odd points.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting one. You kind of got to tell yourself a story on one of these cheap fighters. Does Tim Elliott make it to a decision and pick up some strikes against Muhammad Makhachev? Maybe. Makhachev's not like a super quick finisher, and it's a flyweight fight. What about Victor Henry against Javid Basharat? Basharat, again, kind of a decision machine. Henry, in theory, maybe has a little bit of a grappling edge. Probably not, but there's a case there. Mike Breeden versus Jubilee. Like, Jubilee, again, not a prolific finisher. So for cash, it's really just which one of these cheap guys can give you 30 or 40 along with Volkanovski, so then you can play the 4 favorites you like. Because you don't have to pay up a ton to get minus 200 favorites. You can get, Hamzat, Saeed, Islam, and Sharabutin Magomedov, the debutant I was talking about, or Cedric Dumas, who should smash Zaitar. You can get those guys at not a huge price, so you can play 4 somewhat heavy favorites. I think that's how it goes. You get 4 somewhat heavy favorites, Volkanovski, and then take a shot in the dark at an underdog, and whoever gets that underdog right is going to be above the cash line, and the people whose underdog gets starched in 10 seconds and get 6 points probably going home empty-handed.
Yeah, that seemed more like both of our cards last week because I was thinking, what the heck happened? Like, one of our fighters got nada, 0, zip.
Well, I had the opposite problem, right? I had got a decent score from my super cheap punt, but then I played 2 somewhat heavy favorites that got nothing out of it. So it was the opposite. But yeah, I think from cash, it's a very simple week. It's straightforward. Get 4 favorites you like. One of them is Makhachev. The other one's probably Hamayev, and then 2 other guys. But man, just finding that 6th cheap fighter that makes it all work and doesn't tank your lineup. You don't even need them to win. You don't need 60, 70 points. If you can get 30 and everyone else is getting 10 out of their cheap fighter, you win. Like, that's just going to be what decides it this week. I don't think anyone in cash is paying all the way up to Dudakova or Makhachev. It just seems like a bit too much. Or Ikram against War. Ikram's tempting because he's a middleweight, only ever lost to Hamzat, and is getting a bad welterweight on short notice. So Ikram's tempting at 9,500. Probably not a cash game play for me, but that might be the one where I spend up for. But if you spend up for him, you need him to win in the first minute. It's got to be a quick win or to get 7,000 takedowns.
What about a GPP week?
Yeah, for GPP, then you need your cheap guy to win. So who are the 2 fighters under 7,500 you think might actually win? Get a couple of those. Obviously, you're not playing their opponents. Again, simple, not easy. Very simple. You need 2 of the cheap fighters who are going to win. And by cheap, even if it's 7,800 or whatever, if you get a win out of someone in that, Volkanovski range, great. You're probably cashing. You probably need 2 of those, and then to get the right guys at the top. Simple. Again, not easy. And for GPPs, that Trevor Peek Yahya fight could be huge because Trevor Peek, so aggressive, could start him right away. Yahya should have a huge grappling edge, might take him down 10 times and get a big score. Getting that one right might be a really big point of emphasis for GPPs. And not to plug my own work here, I'm going to be breaking that one down, watching a ton of tape, and coming out with the betting guide for Action Network. So stay tuned to that over the next couple days.
How popular do you think Volkanovski and Usman are going to be because of the name? And yeah, they're coming on short notice, but Volkanovski is in the mid seven, Usman's 7,300, and even in losses, Usman's putting up 60 some odd points.
Yeah, I think fairly popular. Probably less for Usman, I'd get. But I mean, you make a good point. He had 98 and 69 in the two losses to Leon Edwards. But Volkanovski in his only UFC loss to Makhachev scored 62. So not bad scores from either of them.
I mean, I guess if you were playing Usman, you'd hope that this would have been a 5-round fight because then he's got more time for takedowns.
That's what I was gonna say. Obviously, both of Usman's losses that we referenced there were 25-minute fights, which makes it a little bit harder. I think Volkanovski probably slightly more popular, again, just with the extra 5 rounds. But it wouldn't shock me. Let's say all the chalk hits, right? All the heavy favorites win. Who are the two cheap guys that are going to be in the winning lineup? Probably Usman and Volkanovski. So one or both of them in GPPs, I don't hate. Like I could see a situation where they lose and get outscored by their opponent, but still because of the way salary works this week, they end up in the optimal lineup. So I don't know if everyone's thinking that way, but I think they'll be fairly popular. Again, with a lean towards Volkanovski, just because, if there was a quarterback that got to play 6 quarters in the NFL, we'd all play him when everyone else was playing 4. So, and to be fair, that fight is far more likely to go to a decision. Those odds aren't out yet, but I guarantee you the main event will be much likelier to see a decision based on betting odds than Usman versus Chimaev, which is a lot of times how the projection systems come up with the numbers that they do, including the one I do.
Is there a chance that both Makhachev and Volkanovski are in the winning lineup?
Yeah, that wouldn't shock me. I mean, again, if he scores 70, 80 points in a loss, you would need all the other favorites to hit. So if that happens, the only way it does is because all the other expensive fighters won, and you couldn't make a lineup with 6 winners because they all cost too much. So if you're building that way, and I don't think it's a crazy thought, if you're building that way, understand that what you're saying is people couldn't build a lineup with 6 winners because all the expensive guys won, and build accordingly.
And that would mean Usman lost too.
Probably, yeah, because Chimaev, all things considered, not all that expensive for his odds. So if Volkanovski with a loss is in the optimal lineup, Chimaev probably got a quick finish. A lot of those fighters in the upper 8s, low 9s probably put up big scores, is how we arrived at that number, or arrived at that situation. So then again, you need to play Said Nurmagomedov at 88, Sharabutin at 86. Nate Wood at 9,000 is a really aggressive grappler who's a pretty heavy favorite. He could put up a big score even in a decision. That kind of price range is probably what's also going to be in the optimal if Volkanovski and Makhachev both are.
All right, Billy. Thanks for hopping on. We wish you well this week. UFC in Dubai, and then you Lions against the Baltimore Ravens.
Yeah, great time of year to be a Lions and UFC fan. Everything's going swimmingly for us here, and a huge Volkanovski fan, I will say. To admit to everyone at home, probably my favorite fighter. So getting him on this card was just icing on the cake.